Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode here on the Vortex Edge podcast. Jimmy on the mic, and I'm joined by instructor Justin Lipska.
Hey guys.
One of the long-range guys here, and Justin, that's why we've got you talking about today's topic, because we're going to be talking about sighting in a rifle, or zeroing a rifle, also known as the right way, a long-range rifle specifically. Yep. Some people maybe overthink this a little bit. Maybe some people don't think about this quite enough. Justin, it's a big component of when we talk about our intro to long-range classes. Also, it's a huge component when you get into the long-range 1, 2, and 3 of our long-range pipeline, because if you don't have a good zero, the rest of the stuff just it can't even be.
You're
it can't
right.
even exist.
The zero is your baseline. That's what you start off. You know what I mean? All your data is built off your baseline, which is your solid zero.
Right. Absolutely. Now, we titled this, zeroing your long-range rifle the right way. So we're going to go into, of course, when we say the right way, maybe, what, is there more than one way to skin this cat, Justin, you think? Or is there
yes
truly
and no.
one?
Honestly, I mean, I would say there's a solid baseline you can probably deviate a little bit left and right from, but more or less across the board, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, yeah. So this is just as Justin and the other guys here would teach it. Justin, what is... I want to get into every facet of this, because somebody's probably thinking, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to watch this thing, or I'm going to listen to this thing on how to zero a rifle. And so, they're thinking, boom, they just blink right to the range. I'm on the bench, and I got my gun all loaded up and everything like that. But there's stuff even before that.
Oh,
when
absolutely.
You say, where is this whole process even starting?
I would say mounting the optic itself.
Yeah.
That's a whole other kind of like ball of wax. And I've already covered those, I believe, in other podcasts.
Yeah, you have over on the main Vortex podcast. Yeah. Just give us a little refresher of some of the really big things to watch out for and to be sure that you're doing when you are mounting your own optic.
I would say for mounting an optic, if there was one key takeaway, it would be proper torque settings.
Yeah.
After that, there's a slight minutia that kind of goes in with spacing gaps and things like that. But probably the number one thing, if I had to really hit home on any points, would probably be the proper torque settings.
Torque settings. Yeah, That's huge. That's huge. Now, I know the thing we pay a lot of attention to here is also setting up the scope for the individual shooter. And this is something that we see a lot of times when people take their gun or maybe they buy a gun in a scope combo at a retailer or something like that. And, this isn't to throw any shade at anybody behind the counter, but sometimes that person behind the counter will mount everything up and they'll be like, oh, yeah, this is going to be good for the customer. But they just mounted it up for themselves and not the customer. And so people, they're not comfortable. They can't get the right eye relief bebehind the gun. Their cheek and all that is in the wrong spot.
It's like getting behind the car. Well, you're big into cars. Getting behind a vehicle set up for somebody else.
Right.
So when you get in there, you're going to have to adjust the mirrors, you're going to have to adjust the seat and get it set up for you as an individual.
Right.
So
that's without that being right, it does make it. Sometimes I think it's easy to think, that's just little details. That's not really going to affect my zero, but it can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're not going to get quite the amount of performance and extend that capability of that optic if it's not set up properly for you.
Right, because part of the zero, which I'm sure we'll get into, is actually you executing a good shot, and it's difficult to execute a good, consistent shot when you're uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
Now, okay, so talk real quick. We had an episode, and it should have aired by now. We're kind of doing all these in a big batch just to give you guys a little peek behind the curtain before we actually start releasing these. But we talked with Corey, your cohort in the sniper world, a little bit about buying long-range ammo, but that's another thing too, like the ammo side of things.
Absolutely.
What's your biggest recommendation there?
If you're not a hand loader, I would probably suggest buying a couple different boxes of reputable match-grade ammunition and start there. Different guns, for whatever reason, they just like different types of ammunition. Yeah. So you might have two solid different brands of ammunition that's match, and for whatever reason, it might like, I don't know, let's say 168 grain, bow tail hollow point versus maybe something else.
Right.
So
right, yeah. Just because you heard that your buddy who shoots a totally different type of rifle had really good luck with one type of ammo doesn't mean you should go hog wild and go buy huge bulk in that ammunition if you've never tried it through a rifle before.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So if you've got, let's say, assuming you've got all your equipment set up, we'll address that, and maybe that's even stuff we can go further into in other episodes. So now let's say we are on the range. Okay.
Okay.
We've got, I'm not even going to say we've got a bench at our disposal, because maybe, Justin, maybe you like to zero off the ground in the prone or something like that. I'm going to let you get into that. But, like, what is somebody doing? What distance are they looking at? Like, just set it all up from total scratch.
Depending on your optic, we recommend either a 50-yard zero. I mean, there's, 25-yard zero, 36-yard zero, 50, 100, 200-yard zero. So across the board, I would say it's dependent on application as well as your optic.
Right.
So what I mean by that is if you have a simple duplex reticle and maybe your application is hunting here in the Midwest, I would probably suggest a 50-yard zero so you can maximize your point-blank range. But if you want to reach out to distance and things like that, say 1,000 yards, right? I would probably suggest a 100-yard zero, especially if you have a technical reticle and you're able to dial on elevation. 100-yard zero is a really nice baseline because we can kind of work in tenths and kind of do some shock group analysis based on that.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, and so you brought up the whole point-blank range thing, which is something that a lot of hunters think about. That's where they get a chance, and it happens in the blink of an eye, especially where we are in the Midwest. It may not be at these super great distances, so they don't want to have to worry about going in and checking some calculator, checking their turrets, doing all this stuff. They want to be able to make a shot pretty quick before they lose their opportunity. Whereas with the long-range folks, usually what you're doing is you're target shooting at various long-range distances and things like that, and so you have a little bit more time to set up, and you're just going for that ultimate precision. And therefore, that's where you kind of like that 100-yard zero.
Absolutely.
What's the deal with the 200-yard zero?
I honestly think it kind of came about for people who really, I would say, I don't want to say understand ballistics, but the 50-yard zero and 200-yard zero is very close. And I'm going to say very close because in all actuality, you can only have one zero distance. Yes, you might have that unicorn combination out there with the right twist rate, the right bullet and everything like that. It's 50-yard, point of aim, point of impact, same as 200, but it's very rare. So if somebody would like a 200-yard zero, I would suggest a 50-yard zero because it's going to get you fairly close.
Okay.
And maybe 225 yards, for example.
Right.
But it's going to be right in that general ballpark. The reason I don't like a 200-yard zero is because there's other factors we have to deal with, such as wind and things like that. I don't know of any place that has a 200-yard indoor range.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yep. So wind can come into a factor, and maybe that's going to adjust your windage. So you're going to be off a little bit left or right.
Right.
But not only that, say you do have a certain variables with the wind, and that can actually adjust your vertical deviation as well.
Okay, got it. Right. So at 100 yards, now granted, it's not to say that bullets are just magically unaffected by anything at 100 yards. Yeah. But it's much less so. If you're shooting at 200, that's where it starts to come into play. Things like wind. Yeah. You might be like, I'm 2/10 off to the left, so I got to make that adjustment. Yeah. But really, you're actually adjusting for wind.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are people. Yeah, exactly. And I know people who are very effective and very capable with a 200-yard zero.
Right.
They just prefer that versus a 50-yard zero, and now their baseline instead of being 100 is 2.
Right. We've got one of very few indoor 100-yard ranges here at Vortex Edge, but maybe next we got to go for the full-on 200.
Yeah.
We need a really tall. I think not a really tall ceiling, but it would look really funny to look at a target way down there with all that steel. Already on an indoor 100-yard range, it almost looks a bit like the Earth is curving.
That's got a little bit of a illusion to it.
Sure. So, okay, we've established that distance. Now, what other kinds of things are you taking with you to the line? Are you taking, you got your rifle. I know this one we have set up with a bipod. Is that pretty typically what you suggest, rifle with a bipod?
I would say we're talking kind of like precision here.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I feel like a bipod is almost as important with a long-range precision rifle as, say, a holster is with a pistol.
Okay.
So, so we have the front support, and then also I want some rear support. I particularly don't like zeroing or sighting my rifle in like a vise or anything like that. It can change point of impacts, things like that, slightly different. It can affect other things as well, but that's kind of personal preference. So we have the front support, and we need rear support, so I'm going to take a rear bag as well.
Yep. Yeah, that rear bag makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately you want to be imparting as little of your own input on the gun as possible.
Absolutely. So I kind of feel like the bipod, the rear bag, the same like, slinging a carbine type of thing.
Yeah.
So we have front support, we need rear support.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of, that also gets into the somewhat hotly debated topic, which there is a full-length Vortex Nation podcast about, with the whole gun vices and things like that.
Yep.
But yeah, just not generally recommended. As funny as it sounds, because you're like, well, that's the ultimate way to remove yourself from the equation. But yet, you are a valuable part of the whole guns equation, because you need to be part of the recoil system.
Absolutely.
And therefore, you're also part of the harmonics. You're part of the just recoil absorption.
Yeah.
And preventing things from breaking.
Absolutely.
And all that good stuff.
And the way Corey and myself kind of explain it, when we do shot group analysis and things like that, we talk about like the shooter system, or the entire shooting system. That's you as a shooter. That's the gun, the optic, and the ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like you said, the shooter has to be part of that equation.
You got to be part of it, but you want to be as little a part of it as possible. But you got to be a really big part of it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen without you. That's a bit of a paradigm, or no, a paradox, or a pair of something.
I'll default to you on that.
It's a pair of something. Anyway, but okay, so yeah, you want to go up there with the right equipment. We've got all the other stuff. What do you go through when it comes to the actual shooting part, or are we into the shooting part yet?
I would
How about
say no.
There's the bore sight.
Yep, I would say the bore sighting, but before that, I would even say understanding the equipment as a whole. A lot of times we kind of come across some individuals that aren't 100% familiar with their equipment. I was guilty, of that as well. The zeroing process. Every manufacturer has a little manual, so definitely recommend reading those. And that being said, what we're talking about is the zeroing process. Some types of turrets are different than others. Every optic's a little bit different. So before you can even start that, maybe even bore sighting and adjusting everything, you have to make sure that you're following that correct process. So for example, if it has a zero stop system in place, that manufacturer may dictate you have to do steps A and B before you can even start bore sighting.
Yeah, you might have to fully index the elevation turret against the zero stop before you actually go about adjusting it. That happens, I know, all the time, because we do have, like with our zero stops, I believe it's generally the case with all zero stops, but you have to index it against the zero stop before you start dialing. And a lot of people just kind of get in and they're like, woo, and they just go off to the races.
Exactly.
And then when they're done, they're like, all right, why is my zero stop set?
Yeah.
And then they have to go back and undo it all.
Exactly. Or it may, like you said, it may not be set all the way to zero. So when we do reach out to distance, they may run out of elevation, or maybe they get lost in the revolutions, or their data's completely off because it wasn't set correctly from the get-go.
So what you're saying is it may benefit you to actually read the directions.
Yes.
Which... I don't know if Justin's actually right there. He's a pretty smart guy, but that may be the only part that you're wrong about here. But I can say from experience, it actually does generally work out, and it avoids you having to do things twice or 3 times or 4 times.
Yep.
So, okay. Makes total sense. What do? Do you bore sight
I
your
do
rifles?
bore sight.
Like a bolt action rifle like this. How the heck?
So what we have to do with this one?
This one's got a fancy folding stock on it. We have a Ruger Precision rifle for those who are only listening and not watching on YouTube.
So we actually have to collapse the buttstock and actually remove the bolt completely out of the rifle. Mm-hmm. So we would have to do that. Now with different setups and things like that, you may run into issues with comb height, have to lower the comb height so you can remove that bolt.
Right.
So I do like bore sighting. The further out I can get, so for example, 25 yards, if that's all you have, that's all you have. I prefer 50 to 100 yards, so I can be a little bit more refined. I tend to shy away from most laser bore sighters out there on the market. The reason being is because sometimes they are not, quote unquote, zeroable. So if that laser device was to rotate, say 180 degrees, what am I trying to say? The visual laser on your target may shift as well, just by rotating that.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So I feel like the general consensus there is that they're not exactly the worst things to use. They're not like bad to use.
No,
it's just that you have to spend a decent amount of money on them, and they're not exactly going to get you any more precise, perhaps, than you would if you just pull the bolt out and look down the bore and then actually adjust the scope to what you're
certain
seeing.
rifles out there on the market that you can't bore sight, a lot of lever actions, for example.
Sure.
Although, since we're talking about long-range precision, I don't know too many people out there that utilize lever actions for long range.
Is there? What do we have out there? I have a Vepr AK pattern rifle that's pretty accurate.
How far out have you taken that guy?
A little over 500 yards.
Okay.
On a large steel ram with iron sights. But yeah, we're kind of referring to bolt action rifles here, so we're assuming that it's pretty easy to pull that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, so then you just get you get a good bore sight, and the whole point there, Justin, maybe you can elaborate, but the whole point is when you first slap an optic on a rifle, that optic could have been, I've seen it a lot with customers of ours where they buy one, maybe it was in the store, maybe it was a display item or something like that, and people love to go in and turn knobs and things like that, and it's so far off. Or maybe your rifle has a big misalignment to correct for that you wouldn't even be shooting on paper, and then you're guessing as to where to adjust when you can't even see impacts on paper, so we want to at least get that going.
Yep. And all we're doing with bore sighting is looking through the bore or the barrel of the rifle, and we're getting that aligned on target. We have to have a certain solid, stable, and durable platform to work off of. So all we're going to do is align that up with our target, and then from there we're just going to kind of co-witness what we see through the barrel and what we see through the optic.
Sure. I think bore sighting as well, I'll throw this out, another plug for it, as if people need it anymore, but another plug is that it's kind of a free way to pre-diagnose an issue in the system if there is one.
So, for example, tracking.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if the gun isn't moving, which is very key to the bore sight, if you're messing with the gun so much it's tilting all over the place, it's kind of useless. But if the gun isn't moving and you're going and you're adjusting the turrets and the reticle isn't moving inside the scope then to a point where you feel it should be, then you may know something's up. You might want to go check your rings. It could be over-torqued or something like that. We see that.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the most common issue we ever see is over-torqued rings kind of impinging the travel.
Yeah.
But that is something to check out. Although, do note, there is not a problem with your rifle scope if you turn the turret in the up direction and the reticle moves down. That's how it actually is supposed to work.
Yes. Yep, and
Fun
then people
fact.
when they actually go ahead and make their adjustments, now they're confused.
Right. Yeah. So don't pay attention to the up, down, left, right thing on the turret while you're bore sighting. It will be opposite. Everything's going to make sense when you actually get to shooting.
Yeah.
But, okay, right. So you get a good bore sight in.
Yep.
Yeah, at least it's something that's going to keep, like you said, keep you on paper.
Absolutely.
When you start shooting.
Yeah, relative to the size of the paper.
Yeah. So, can we shoot yet?
Yeah, I would say we're about there.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yes, I think we can get rounds downrange now.
What do you walk people through? Like in our intro to long range class, a huge portion of it is zeroing.
Yes.
And with zeroing comes a large responsibility on you as the shooter.
Yes.
To be a good marksman.
Absolutely. So the way we kind of walk through it is we talk about fundamentals first. So we'll kind of go through Corey's 8-point shooters checklist. He got, I think, from Modern Day Sniper. But after we have that, before we even fire live rounds, we're going to have them do 5 perfect prefaces. So they're going to fire their rifle 5 times dry.
Okay.
And we want to have that individual or that student get a feel for what that trigger's like. Some precision rifles have lighter trigger pulls than others. If they're not used to shooting a precision rifle with that light of a trigger, it may be, oh, wow, kind of a little bit of a surprise to them. So we want to get their comfortability and confidence with pressing that trigger.
Okay. And the perfect press thing that you're saying is you want to be behind the rifle. You want to go through everything. This is dry firing. You want to go through everything as though you were really shooting and you were going to send a real round down range. And when you finally break that trigger, as you're continuing to look through the optic, you want to see where the crosshairs didn't move.
Absolutely.
Right? That's what you're saying is that perfect press.
Correct. We want to check our natural point of aim. So we want to make sure that we're not forcing that reticle on a target using any muscular tension. We have a little bit of a I think, a segment on that as well, natural point of aim. So we want to check that. We want to check our breathing. Yes, when we do that perfect press, we're not going to have recoil, obviously, but we can at least decipher where that reticle was when that trigger was pressed.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, some of that, I believe so. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be way off, but like the breathing, the natural point of aims, these marksmanship things are part of that 8-point shooter checklist. Do you know what that? Corey always goes over it. He's got it down like it's on the back of his hand.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that?
So it's
maybe even if it's not in order, what are 8 of the?
So it's going to be, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
But he does kind of go over the placement of the shooting hand, the non-firing hand. He goes over placement of the elbows themselves, because we will want that that nice angle. So we don't want to be canted left or right. So if you were to draw like a line from the target to the barrel, and then another line with your elbows, he wants that like perpendicular.
A nice 90-degree angle.
Yep. So that's one of the things he talks about. He also talks about kind of leg placement as well, hip placement. He really likes being perfectly in line with that rifle. So target, barrel, shoulder, like hips, all in a nice perfect line.
It's kind of a thing that you see a lot of people do, who they don't even necessarily always realize they're doing it, but to get comfortable, they'll cant themselves way off from the rifle, and they'll kind of come into the rifle from an angle.
Yes.
Instead of being right behind it.
Yep. And that might be okay for that initial shot. But any subsequent follow-on shots, you're going to have a little bit harder time to manage the recoil.
Yeah, because the recoil in that case is acting on you as a lever.
Yep, and it's
instead of you just basically just stopping it.
Exactly, and that rifle is going to want to take the path of least resistance.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, I knew I was putting you on the spot by asking about the true 8 points. But everybody's kind of got their own version. He goes through the 8-point thing because it's really that's how he talks about it. But the end result is the same thing. You want to be squared up to the rifle and the target. You want to be in a good position where you're comfortable, and the rifle is going to go through, I would say, the optimal recoil, where you're also going to be placing kind of the optimal forces on the rifle as you break the trigger, etc. Again, like we said a while ago, to be putting as little negative input on the gun as possible.
And the way we kind of explain it, the more variables of input you put in that rifle, the more variables of output you're going to get.
Yeah. What is that natural point of aim thing? Like, explain that a little bit, because you're very good at demonstrating it. I've seen you actually hit bullseyes with your eyes closed.
Yes. Yep.
Because of natural point of aim. Explain it. It's kind of a strange thing.
So natural point of aim is where that rifle is going to want to lie naturally. So if you didn't have any muscular input, where that reticle is going to be on target, so you have the relation of the target, relation of your rifle, and you as a shooter. So that's all going to be more or less with no muscular input. That's where all those items want to fall in line naturally. So you may perceive that your reticle is on target, but you might be muscling it on a target.
Yeah.
So that would be an indication that your natural point of aim is off. In order to check that, you can just, again, keep your good cheek to stock weld. All you're going to do is simply close your eyes, take 1 to 3 natural respiratory cycles, and then open your eyes again.
Yeah.
And then if you're off left and right, you're going to have to go ahead and shift your body position. Shifting the gun will not do that. If you shift the gun, then you're still inputting muscular tension with your body. So you actually have to shift your body, like hips and then, upper body as well.
Right. Yeah. This was something I know it is even still something like for me when I first started shooting, getting into the point where you have yourself in the right natural point of aim for the rifle to be aiming at the target. It takes some time because you got to start to realize where you're supposed to be in relation to the gun and the target where you're shooting to get good natural point of aim. And it can't, I'm thinking sometimes, I've shot a PRS match before, and sometimes you're in such a gobbledygook position, you're getting if you can get 80% of the way there and 90% of the way there, that's about it. You're on the clock and all this stuff is going on. But it seems like something that you can get better and better and better at, to the point where if you are in a situation like in a PRS match, or like maybe you're in a hunting scenario,
absolutely,
or something like that, where it's just you're quicker to get into it.
Yep.
You're not so uncomfortable or unsure about where to be.
Yeah.
It just happens more
And
naturally.
I understand when people are in competition or in a hunting situation or real life situation, what have you, they're not going to have the time or luxury to go through that natural point of aim and check all that.
Yeah.
But the reason we harp on it so much is because if they know what right looks like and feels like, they can hopefully kind of replicate that.
Or get close to it.
Yep.
I know we throw people out of their comfort zone in long range 3 by throwing them on, whether it's a rooftop or a PRS barricade,
absolutely,
or a cattle gate or something like that.
Yep, exactly. And they're like, well, my natural point of aim just went out the window.
Yeah, I'm going for best available. Yeah. Okay. Well, we said we could shoot, and then, of course, we talked a lot about things that didn't involve sending rounds out of range. But these are all good things.
No,
these are
absolutely.
All good things. Okay. Comes to shooting. You've had 5 perfect presses by now. So really all you need to do is do the same thing, but with a round in the chamber this
Absolutely.
time. Now, is there anything special about, in the marksmanship side of things? If you're all set up on the front end, is there anything special about anything you got to do when the rifle actually goes off?
So
it seems like it would just go off and your body should handle the recoil fine.
Should handle the recoil, absolutely. There's a couple things the instructors here like to put out. Follow through versus recovery and things like that.
Okay.
So follow through, all we're doing is just simply applying, the fundamentals throughout the, shot process. Recovery is actually, so I would say follow through is more of like a passive thing, and then recovery would be more active. So getting back on a target and things like that, manipulating the bolt would be more of like a recovery type of thing.
Okay.
Something else we have to do as a shooter, especially when we are zeroing our rifle, is to be 100% confident with that shot. So if I'm going to shoot one round and I know it was a bad round, or I pulled it, or I flinched, or I did something like that, I really can't utilize that as a data point because it's invalid at that point.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So kind of calling our shots during this process as well.
Now, part of the way you can do that is with that follow-through.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Right. So follow-through, maybe you can go in depth a little bit more about that, because it's very important.
Yes.
It seems weird because it's something that you you will explain it probably better than I can, but it always seemed weird to me when people first explained it, because I'm like, I've already broke the trigger. The gun's already gone bang, but somehow still something I'm consciously doing even after that, and how I just deal with the aftermath is somehow helping my shooting be a little better.
So if I would to relate it, say during dry fire, for example, just like those 5 perfect presses, I'm aware of where that reticle is lifting from.
Yeah.
So part of my follow through is I'm aware of where that center crosshair is lifting from. So my follow through would look like, especially if I'm shooting as an individual, I'm being cognizant of where I see that reticle lift from. So did it lift from the center of that diamond, or my aiming point, or did I do a little bit of unwanted movement into that shot and now it lifted maybe a little bit low and left? So that's kind of what my follow through looks like.
This is where, with precision guys, why I started to understand so much why they go with these little tiny 6mm cartridges and things of that nature, because I remember we've got a couple guys around the office who shoot PRS, and they're talking about the basically, these aren't their words verbatim, but they're talking about the punishing recoil of the 6.5 Creedmoor, and you're like, 6.5 Creedmoor? Like, what are you talking about? Yeah. But then you go to a match or something like that where you're having to shoot, and you're having to pay attention to what's going on. You're having to watch your impacts for corrections. Nobody's calling it for you. That's your job.
Yeah.
And then you start to see where even if you're shooting a decently heavy gun in 6.5 Creedmoor, it can be hard to do that and see through the optic, where that lighter recoiling rifle kind of stays put longer. And the other thing is, so now I'll just get out of that for a moment, but some people get these big old bruisers, or it's like a lightweight gun and a pretty hefty cartridge.
Absolutely.
It's hard to follow through on something like that, not always because, the gun's going to move a lot, but if you're getting to the point where your finger's about to break that trigger, and you do that thing that you just did where you're like, I don't want to do it, then you're not concentrating on where the reticle's lifting from anymore. Exactly. You're just concentrating on self-preservation.
Oh, absolutely. And part of our follow-through we were talking about is staying on the gun. You don't have to fire around and then come off the gun entirely and look at the, target's 100 yards away. You're not going to be able to see that bullet hole anyway.
You're seeing it better through the scope.
Yeah. And you said it earlier, consistency, right? So we want to be on the gun as much as possible. We don't want to come off the gun. So when I go through my follow-through process, I'm being cognizant of where that reticle's lifting from. I'm not breaking my cheek to stock weld. I'm keeping all of those fundamentals in place. The placement of my firing hand, my non-firing hand, all of that kind of remains in place as well. So, and like you said, firing those, 6 millimeter type cartridges versus those heavier ones, it's easier to do that.
Yeah. How about when it comes to groups and stuff like that? Do you recommend people shoot in groups? And
I do.
Yeah.
But that's kind of based on the individual. So the way we kind of do it, which we're actually going to be doing here in a couple hours, we're going to have those individuals aim for the center of that target, because that's going to give us the greatest margin for error, so we can still, get rounds hopefully on paper after the bore sighting process. Normally, what we do is we'll fire just one round, and then that individual it's going to have to be up to that individual to say it's clean or dirty. So, was it a good shot? Did you pull it? Did you flinch? Something like that. And if it was a true clean shot, then we can deduce that if we followed subsequent rounds, they'd be in that general area. So I'll make a correction right off the bat just based on one round to get individuals close. After that, then I do 3 rounds. I know people are very big into 5-round shot groups, which is great, but you can be low left with 3 rounds or you can be low left with 5 rounds.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah, more data points isn't always bad, but if 3 is going to say the same thing 5 would, why?
Yeah. So we only do 3 rounds to get that rough 0, and then after we kind of fine tune it and make our adjustments with our turrets and things like that, then we go ahead and do those 5-round shot groups.
Oh, okay. Got it. Now, when you make your adjustments,
yes,
that's a big part of zeroing. When you make your adjustments, you've shot your first 3-round group or something of that nature, and you're low and to the left. How do you go about making adjustments in a manner that is not guessing? I think a lot of people tend to get like, I'm low and left, looks about 3 inches. So I'll just dial this for a little bit.
So one thing nice that they've come out with, in the past decade or so, probably even longer than that now, has been technical reticles. They've been around for a while. So we actually utilize that reticle. Every little hash mark inside that optic, all those subtensions, they mean something. Yes, there's a lot of them, but it's just redundancies built in like a grid. So we actually utilize, for example, in our intro class, is a transparency overlay. So we'll actually.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yep. I remember that.
Straight out of grade school math class.
Yep. So we actually show an individual how to actually go ahead and make those measurements. So, for example, we're no longer thinking in inches, right? Be like, oh, it's 3 inches, so now I got to do the math, and okay, 3 inches. It's every click is a quarter of an inch roughly. So we take that out of the equation. And the reason we do it is because inches is a unit of measurement, so are MOA and mil radian. So why think in 2 units of measurement if you're going to, get to the equation or the solution with 1?
Somebody gave you a tape measure, and they were like, measure the size of this room. And you were like, all right, how am I going to do this in degrees? That's kind of what it would be like.
Yeah, absolutely. So we utilize the reticle, and again, just measuring out how far our impact's actually off. Hopefully at 100 yards with most modern day optics, with the correct magnification. And if the ocular focus is set properly, because that should be done with the whole scope mounting procedure. And if you can't do it, we can always check it on the range. So that's another big portion, going back to scope mounting. But so all we're going to simply do is measure out how far away in MOA or mils that bullet is. So instead of guessing in inches, now we can have a refined measurement.
Yeah,
makes sense. So I'm going to measure out how far it is. Say it's, maybe 0.6 mils left. So on my turret, I'm going to go 0.6 mils.
Right, and it's as simple as that.
Yep, absolutely.
Kind of gives you the answer.
Yeah.
Then you go ahead and shoot a final group and confirm it.
Yes, I like how you said confirm, because we can't assume anything, right? We always have to confirm. But the reason we're confirming is because after all of that, we may have to re-index our turrets. back to that baseline we were talking about. Because we, depending on the optic, we may have loosened up set screws and things like that, maybe taking the caps off. So we would make our final adjustment, go ahead and tighten everything back down when it comes to the set screws or the zero stop. And then after we do all of that, we shoot a confirmation group. That confirmation group, I always like to do 5 rounds. Like any other survey you do, the more data points, the more accurate your solution is going to be. The reason we confirm it is because we can't assume that we didn't input any unwanted adjustments in there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because sometimes I have yet to really do it. It's kind of hard to do, but I could see how you could do it if you're re-tightening all those set screws. If you got one big screw on the top of your turret and you tighten it and you accidentally give it a click, that could do something.
Yeah,
there.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that you check? I mean, at that point, really, your rifle should be zeroed, and then we're on to the whole process of gathering ballistics and dope, and then going out and shooting, and that's some of the stuff I'm sure we'll talk about in future podcasts. But when zeroing, this is really the time where issues can start to arise. So when we're not going to be able to cover every single potential issue that could have occurred during the zeroing process, if you're seeing something like this, but when groups aren't as tight as you want them to be, or when you see in the reticle how much you should have dialed, you dial that much, and it doesn't do what you anticipated it would do, what are I don't know, the top 2, 3, 4 things that you start looking at right away to address what's going on?
Absolutely. So you kind of mentioned it earlier during the bore sighting, like a tracking test or a box test, if you will. So a box test, I'm going to dial on 5 MOA left to shoot a couple of rounds or whatever, then dial up and, make a box basically. Yeah. So I would do that, making sure everything is correct and good to go. And if that was pretty accurate, then I know that, okay, well, the optic is operating the way it should. So I can maybe take that out of the equation. And that's why we talk about the shooting system. Because if I can eliminate the optic, all right, as the cause, then it's something else.
Right.
So then maybe it's the ammunition, or maybe it's the gun, or maybe, like you said, it's me as a shooter. So that's why we really break down the shooting system in those aspects, because now I can start diagnosing it and I can start eliminating one of those.
Right. Makes sense. Seems like, there's 3 big components we mentioned. Of course, there's far more components if you really boil it down, but, you got optic, gun, and ammo.
Yes.
4, because there's you, the shooter, too. You might just not be shooting very well, but nobody wants to admit that. We're going to talk about gear first, which everybody loves to do. But the optic, I think, biggest thing there, it seems like, is make sure it's mounted right.
Absolutely.
What I mean? Torque specs and everything like that. That is, oh boy, that's the number one thing.
Yep. And if I know the optic is mounted correctly, maybe it's the gun then. You're like, okay, maybe are my action screws loose or something like that.
Yep.
So checking the action screws. Like you said earlier, making sure that rifle is set up to you as an individual. Maybe for whatever reason, the comb height's off. So you're inducing scope shadow, but you actually can't see it because you're so up on the gun.
Or perhaps back to the optic, if your comb height is all wrong or something like that, and you also didn't have your parallax set right, and you're shooting at 100 yards, but it's set at 500 or infinity, then that could be inducing parallax error too.
Absolutely. When it kind of comes down to it, some of those things, the way I kind of troubleshoot it is I may induce scope shadow for some students and have them shoot with scope shadow. The way I do that, though, is I make sure that the scope shadow is equal all the way around and kind of utilize it as almost a peep sight, if you will.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So,
what we were just talking about, the action screw thing is so weird. I have a Browning ELR lever gun. So there I am with a lever gun. Yeah. Very accurate lever gun.
Absolutely.
That has this screw on the forend that tightens the forend part down to, I don't know, it's right underneath the barrel. I think it tightens it down right to the barrel. Anyway, but even just the torque on that screw can change my point of impact. Yeah. Which is funny because I remember one time I was shooting pretty well. Then all of a sudden I started not shooting very well. And naturally, again, it wasn't me. It was the equipment. It was the equipment. So I start looking at the equipment, and I was like, the screw's a little loose. So I tightened it, and then everything was way different, like suddenly. And so it's little things like that can cause can cause issues. So I think it's always worth really diving in. If you're seeing something that's weird, I don't like to assume, well, just throw my hands up. Gun sucks. The ammo sucks. Whatever it is. There's so many little variables to this whole equation.
Absolutely. There's one rifle I can think of that both you and I came across that issue. And it was ammo sensitivity for that specific.
Oh, and like hyper ammo sensitivity to the point where you had to test out like 12 different types of ammo through the thing.
But now it's consistently under 1 MOA.
Right. It is very interesting how that all worked out. I remember that. That was quite a stressful time for you, Justin.
Yes. It was. Something else that you kind of mentioned is any little adjustments you do. So you mentioned the action screws. Also, I've seen bipods, believe it or not, whether you have them loaded or a neutral load, or if, excuse me, or if anything's coming into play with the bipod affecting your shot groups as well.
Yeah, sometimes if you have a foreign that's a little bit flexible and the bipod's mounted on the end of it, as you load into it, it can actually cause the foreign to come up, touch the barrel, and now we've changed the barrel harmonics, which is causing inaccuracies.
Absolutely.
It is such a wild thing, and we take it so for granted all the time. You think every rifle that comes out of the box, you can feed it anything, mount anything on top, and it'll shoot sub-MOA, but there's... I just, there's so much to it. And oftentimes it is a credit, I think, to the manufacturers of such things that there's got to be on any given gun, there's got to be just like at least a couple of things that probably aren't ideal, but those guns still shoot well. Like it's a testament to how well they can make them function even in a less than ideal setup. Because I imagine there's tons of them out there right now that are functioning just fine, even though they're not at their optimal point. But anyway, those are other stories. Those are good.
Yeah, for another time.
Yeah, good. But that's zeroing a long-range rifle, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we left out?
Let's see. After I re-index the turrets, I personally, like I mentioned earlier, I like to do a box test just to make sure everything's functioning the way it should.
Yeah.
And I didn't mess up something else up somewhere else in the process. So I'll do a little quick impromptu, maybe like tracking test, if you will. So I'll do that, making sure everything's good to go, and then re-index my turrets back to my baseline, 0, and I should be good to go.
Yeah. Do you ever find, like, when you do box tests, this is something you've done before, and I know people have brought it up at times, because they're trying to test the accuracy of the tracking of the scope and stuff like that. And there are very expensive optical pieces of equipment like we have to test the tracking. Like, box tests, there's kind of some nuance to them.
There is.
Like, for example, if you're doing a box test and you're like, well, I know that should be doing this and, X, Y, Z, and you're shooting at 100 yards, for example, or at least your gun is sighted in at 100 yards and you set up a target and you go and you shoot at it. Well, what if the target's not actually at 100 yards? What if it's at like 102 or something? Like, these are little things, but if then you start wigging yourself out about, well, slightly off. That's the only thing that I sometimes think about with people in box tests is they can start to overanalyze it.
Absolutely. And I kind of said impromptu because mine's very kind of a down and dirty. But like, okay, I'm going to do it here, here, here. It looks about right. I'm not going to go out with a micrometer, for example, or, calipers and be like, it's a little off.
Right.
So, because like you said, it could be a myriad of other things kind of coming into play as well.
Yeah. But that's good stuff. All good points. I think then this just really sets you up for all the other great things that come along with shooting long range. You can't do it.
Yeah.
You can't. Literally can't.
Yep.
Without a proper zero.
Exactly.
Like even when I look at guns in my safe that maybe even they have an optic mounted on them, but they're not zeroed, they're useless. I look at them as useless. They could be useful, but right now,
it's not like
zero use.
Pick it up. Yeah, absolutely. But again, like after I do that, I take everything back to my baseline. That includes the parallax. That includes my magnification, which I don't think we touched on. But I like to zero on the highest magnification.
You do?
Yep. A lot of people don't like to do that. I'm a big component of it because I want to be as precise as possible. So I want the most refined aiming point as possible. Mm-hmm. So I always crank that up to highest magnification.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And then when I put it away or re-index the turrets, that's something else I do is back the magnification all the way back down to its lowest setting.
Yeah, when you're out and about, when you're just starting off in a situation like a long-range situation, it is nice to start at least on a lower mag.
I like it. So
it gives you so much context.
Yep, absolutely. Your field of view is...
Yeah. Well, good stuff.
Yeah.
Justin, thank you very much. For those who are listening/watching, hopefully this answered maybe some questions out there about the zeroing process, or if you are about to start the zeroing process, you didn't even know about all this stuff. Hopefully now we've shed some light on these things that you can be doing to get the best possible zero out of your long-range rifle. If you have questions about that, though, hit us up. You can comment below if you're watching on YouTube, and you can also hit us up over on Instagram at Vortex Edge.
Yes.
I almost said Nation Podcast, but it's the Vortex Edge Podcast, very specifically. And we'd love to help you out there. Of course, you can also come out for a class. Justin's one of the long-range guys. Corey, who we mentioned earlier, who has those 8 points of the shooter checklists.
Yes.
He's got it down. And all the other guys, they like shooting long-range too. We'd love to have you out. It's a ton of fun. If you've never touched a long-range gun before, or you want to go through all the stuff we just talked about, sign up for Intro to Long Range. Super cool, because we supply all the guns and the ammo and everything. You get a gun a lot like this one to use for the class. Not to keep, but for the class.
Yeah.
A lot like this one. It's got the Strike Eagle 5-25 on top, so you get a nice elevation and windage turret are exposed with the zero stop. You get all the nice bells and whistles. You get a Ruger RPR and 6.5 Creedmoor. So it's a really great class. It'll get you set on the right track.
Yep.
Love it.
Nice.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
See you on the next one. Bye. That's a wrap, everybody. Hope you liked this topic. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and of course, subscribe right here, because there's going to be plenty more to come. If there's topics you'd like to hear us go over on the Vortex Edge podcast in the future, you can let us know by commenting below or hitting us up on Instagram, which is at Vortex Edge. We'd love to hear your suggestions so we can be bringing you the kind of episodes and topics that you want to hear. Otherwise, we'll be seeing you on a future episode. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Bye.